Most people don't lose opportunities because they're not smart. They lose them because at the exact moment they needed to speak, their words collapsed. A meeting, a relationship, a chance to lead. And later they say, I knew what to say, I just couldn't say it. This is not a confidence problem. This is a communication muscle that was never trained. And muscles don't grow by wishing, they grow by daily resistance. In the next 30 days, you won't become louder, you won't become fake, you won't memorize fancy words, you will become unshakable. The first key point is that communication doesn't actually begin when your mouth opens. Most people believe that if they can string words together, they are communicating. But real communication begins long before that, in the silent space between thought and expression. It begins with how clearly you understand yourself, what you truly believe, and how unshakably you can hold those beliefs when faced with doubt or opposition. Imagine a violin string. If it's loose, it won't produce music no matter how skillfully you bow it. But if it's tight, taut, and resonant, even the lightest touch creates harmony. Your mind is the string, and clarity is the tension that makes your words resonate. Every time you speak without clarity, it's like playing a broken instrument. The message is there, but it never lands the way it should. Think of a young woman named Maya who always froze during team meetings. She had brilliant ideas, solutions that could change the outcome of entire projects. Yet when she was asked her opinion, her voice wavered, her sentences scattered, and she left the room frustrated. Why? Because she had never trained her mind to hold an idea completely before letting it out. She had thought in fragments, and fragments became fragmented speech. One day she made a conscious decision. For 10 minutes each morning, she would take a single idea, a single concept, and reduce it to one sentence. One sentence she could understand, one sentence she could own. Within weeks, when Maya spoke in meetings, she no longer stammered. Her colleagues leaned in. Her ideas were heard, not ignored. This is the invisible muscle of clarity, the part that silently works while no one is watching, but when it reveals itself, it commands attention effortlessly. Clarity is not about being brief for the sake of brevity. It's about being precise in a world full of noise. Picture a crowded train station during rush hour. If you shout a warning in random words, no one hears it. But if you focus on one word, one urgent phrase, people stop, turn, and act. Thoughts are the words you will later speak, and if they wander or split in every direction, your message will scatter. Every morning, take a moment to reflect. What am I truly thinking? What am I trying to communicate before I say a single syllable? By doing this, you are already practicing communication before any conversation begins, before the pressure of someone's eyes makes your mind jittery. This is where unshakable speakers are made, not in front of an audience, but in quiet reflection. There is a common trap people fall into. They assume clarity will magically appear when they need it most. A man named Jordan thought he could wing it in interviews because he knew his subject matter. But knowledge alone does not translate into influence. In his first few interviews, he stumbled, contradicted himself, and left interviewers confused. Only when he began rehearsing his thoughts beforehand, distilling each answer into a clear, unwavering point, did the difference emerge. Clarity does not rely on raw intelligence. It relies on conscious structuring of thought, practiced silently, until your mind can deliver it under pressure. Communication is a mirror of your internal order. Chaos inside creates chaos outside, but focus inside produces effortless authority outside. Clarity also requires courage. There is a strange vulnerability in knowing exactly what you believe and then choosing to express it. Many avoid this because they fear judgment, confrontation, or simply sounding wrong. But there is a profound freedom in this act. I once watched a small business owner, Lena, argue a new marketing idea to her board of skeptical executives. She spoke slowly, one sentence at a time, repeating her core message with calm conviction. Some executives rolled their eyes at first, some whispered doubts, But by the end of her explanation, every single one of them understood what she envisioned. She had trained herself to hold her thought with quiet confidence, and that clarity carried her idea straight into action. This is what separates those who talk and those who lead. The willingness to sit with your thoughts until they are unshakable and then release them with steady intent. Many people confuse speed with skill. They think if they can answer quickly, they are communicating well. The truth is the opposite. The deeper the understanding, the slower the delivery can be, because your words are precise and purposeful. Take a moment to notice how a master storyteller speaks. Every pause, every carefully chosen word comes from complete mastery of the idea they are conveying. You can do the same with any conversation. Practice summarizing one thought in multiple ways until your brain can select the clearest version instantly. It feels strange at first, almost unnatural, but it trains the mind to hold ideas firmly so that when life throws a chaotic moment at you, your words no longer crumble. They land with intention. Finally, clarity is inseparable from authenticity. You can craft elegant sentences, but if they don't reflect your actual understanding, they fall flat. People sense insincerity instantly. Think of an old friend who always sounded smart but never meant what they said. Their words floated like smoke, uncatchable and forgettable. Contrast that with someone who might not have perfect grammar but speaks from lived experience, from observation, from deeply held belief. Their words stick. By grounding every idea in your personal lens, your own experiences, and the truth you have faced, clarity becomes not just intellectual but magnetic. Others are drawn not to the volume of your voice, but to the solidity of your thought, the confidence in your inner architecture, the unshakable foundation from which you speak. The second key point is that trying to sound impressive often makes you invisible. Most people think communication is about dazzling others with clever words, polished phrases, or technical jargon. But the truth is, the brain is not impressed by complexity, it's comforted by clarity. I once knew a man named Gaur who worked in finance. He would pepper every meeting with technical terms, obscure acronyms, and long, twisting sentences that he thought made him appear smart. But after hours of listening, his team admitted they barely understood a word he said. Gaur was brilliant, but brilliance that cannot be understood is invisible. People don't follow brilliance, they respond to resonance. Words must land in the mind and in the heart, not just float above them like smoke. There is a subtle arrogance in overcomplication. We tell ourselves, if I sound smarter, they will respect me. But respect is not built on vocabulary, it is built on the courage to be understood. I watched a teacher named Anna work with her students in a language class. She could have used every grammatical term correctly, but instead she chose simple stories, simple sentences, and examples pulled straight from life. Her students leaned forward, laughed, absorbed every lesson. She was teaching not for applause, but for comprehension. Her words carried weight because they could be grasped, digested, and remembered. People are drawn to simplicity not because it's easy, but because it is rare. The less you need to decorate your message, the more it speaks. Think about a small cafe owner named Raj, who had a dream of attracting more customers. He tried fancy slogans, elaborate menus with exotic terms, and a marketing strategy full of complex promises. Nothing worked. One day, he simply said, "We make good coffee, served warm every day." People started coming, not because the words were clever, but because they were clear and relatable. Clarity allowed his voice to reach the people where "oh" mattered, instead of floating above them in a cloud of sophistication. There is power in being direct. There is power in saying what you mean without disguising it. Complexity may impress for a moment, but it rarely moves anyone to action. Simplicity is also a mirror of authenticity. People can sense when you are trying too hard to impress. They feel it in the hesitation, the forced phrasing, the tiny flickers of insecurity behind your words. I knew a lawyer named Simone who struggled to connect with clients. She realized that when she stopped using legalese and explained cases in plain human language, people began to trust her. She wasn't watering down her expertise, she was translating it. Her words became bridges instead of barriers. The lesson is subtle but profound. The more you simplify without losing truth, the more you allow yourself to be heard, to be trusted, and ultimately to be followed. There is a rhythm to simple communication that complex speech can never match. Consider musicians in a jazz band. The magic is not in playing every note on the page, but in knowing which notes to leave out, which silence to honor, which space to give a melody to breathe. Words are the same. Speaking simply requires choosing what to leave unsaid, shaping sentences so they land naturally, and allowing the listener's mind to fill in what is not forced upon it. A high school coach I knew, Mark, explained complex plays in 3 words or less. At first, his team doubted him. By game day, the simplicity allowed them to act instinctively without hesitation. Complexity slows action, simplicity sparks it. Simplicity is also a sign of courage because it requires you to confront the essence of your thought. It forces you to strip away pretension, to examine whether what you want to say is truly meaningful. I remember a young journalist, Layla, who spent hours crafting articles with ornate vocabulary until an editor asked her to rewrite them as if she were explaining them to her little brother. At first, she resisted, fearing she would sound naive. But in that process, she discovered the heart of her story. Her words became sharper, cleaner, and more compelling. Trying to impress is easy. Distilling thought to its simplest form is courageous because it exposes both the idea and yourself to scrutiny. Finally, simplicity invites connection in a way that complexity never can. When you speak plainly, you give people room to enter your world without intimidation. Imagine a friend who tells a story and you hang on every word because you understand it immediately. Now imagine someone using $10 words in every sentence. You leave the conversation feeling exhausted, like you missed the point entirely. A man named Elias learned this the hard way in networking events. He shifted from trying to sound brilliant to telling one clear, relatable story in every conversation. Suddenly, doors opened, collaborations formed, relationships deepened. Simplicity does not diminish you, it amplifies your presence. It makes your voice a place people want to return to, a place where understanding, trust, and influence naturally follow. The third key point is that your tone speaks before your words. People often believe that if they have the right arguments, the perfect phrasing, or a clever joke, they will be heard. But the truth is, even the most brilliant words can land flat if your tone does not carry conviction. I remember watching a young entrepreneur named Malik pitch his startup to a room of seasoned investors. His slides were flawless, his data precise, and his story compelling. Yet by the end, the room was polite but disengaged. The problem wasn't the message, it was the way he delivered it. His voice wavered, his enthusiasm faltered, and his certainty never reached his listeners. Tone carries more weight than words because humans are wired to feel before they think. There is a natural instinct in all of us to react to emotion before content. I once sat in a lecture where the speaker's voice was monotone, but her message was revolutionary. Half the audience doodled, scrolled, or whispered, missing insights that could have changed their perspective entirely. Then, in the very next session, a speaker spoke about the same topic using the simplest phrases, yet his voice radiated calm certainty and quiet authority. People leaned forward, nodded, and scribbled notes furiously. The words were almost identical, but the delivery made the difference. Your tone is the bridge between your mind and the minds of others. Without it, even clarity and simplicity struggle to connect. Tone also reveals your inner state more than anything else you express. Imagine a nurse comforting a frightened patient. She could recite every comforting fact perfectly, but if her voice trembles, if she rushes, the patient will feel anxiety, not reassurance. On the other hand, a slow, steady tone conveys security without needing elaborate explanations. This principle applies to every conversation, meeting, or interaction. People are subconsciously attuned to the emotional undertone of your voice. It is a reflection of whether you trust yourself, whether you are grounded in what you are saying, and whether your presence deserves attention. I think of a young teacher named Ravi who struggled to command respect in his classroom. His content was accurate, his curriculum engaging, yet students constantly challenged or ignored him. A mentor told him, "You are speaking words. I want you to speak certainty." Ravi began practicing by reading passages aloud, intentionally changing his tone each time. Once with doubt, once with neutrality, and once with calm, unwavering certainty. He noticed that the same words could either fizzle or spark engagement, depending on the tonal choice. Gradually, his students began to listen the first time, not after repeated reminders. Tone is invisible, yet it is the magnet that draws people to your message. Tone also allows your presence to assert authority without arrogance. There is a manager named Claire who leads large teams with gentle yet firm influence. She never raises her voice unnecessarily, rarely embellishes her statements, yet when she speaks, decisions are made and attention is automatic. Her secret is not volume or volume alone, it is tone. The steadiness in her voice communicates competence, calmness, and reliability. People trust her because her words carry an internal alignment with her thoughts. When tone and truth merge, influence flows effortlessly, and resistance dissolves before it has a chance to form. It is easy to overlook tone because it feels intangible. We measure success by content, by preparation, by facts and figures. But tone is what makes the facts alive, the preparation persuasive, and the figures meaningful. Consider a storyteller recounting a simple childhood memory. If the story is told flatly, it is forgettable. If the storyteller pauses, emphasizes, softens, or strengthens at the right moments, listeners are transported into the experience. That subtle orchestration, that unspoken emotional current in the voice, is tone at work. It is the difference between being heard and being felt. Finally, tone is a reflection of your relationship with yourself. If your mind is uncertain, your words will shake. If your heart doubts, your voice will falter. I once met a young leader named Jasmine who prepared for a crucial board presentation by practicing not just what to say but how to say it. She recorded herself, adjusted the cadence of her speech, and noticed when her tone betrayed hesitation. By the time she presented, her words were ordinary, but her delivery was extraordinary. Every person in the room felt her confidence, her clarity, her calm authority. Tone does not lie. It is the sound of your inner conviction, speaking before words even form, shaping how every listener perceives you, trusts you, and remembers you. The fourth key point is that learning to pause without apologizing is one of the most overlooked powers in communication. Most people feel compelled to fill every silence with words, as if quietness is a void that must be feared. But silence is not emptiness, it is a statement. I once watched a CTO speak to a room of anxious employees after a sudden company setback. After stating the facts plainly, she paused, letting her words settle in the room. The silence stretched for a heartbeat longer than anyone expected. And in that pause, people stopped panicking, started thinking, and began to absorb the weight of her message. That pause, unhurried and unapologetic, spoke louder than any explanation could have. There is a subtle courage in pausing because it forces you to confront a moment fully instead of rushing to fill it. I think of a young musician named Leo who was performing a solo in front of a crowded auditorium. At first, he rushed every note, afraid the audience might judge him for hesitation. Then he learned to pause intentionally, to let a chord resonate before moving to the next. The difference was striking. The audience leaned in, caught every subtlety, and felt each moment as if it were their own heartbeat. Pausing is not weakness, it is mastery. A declaration that you are in control of your presence, and that your words are not dependent on speed or volume to be effective. Most of us fear silence because it exposes our thoughts, our vulnerability, our uncertainty. But the truth is, silence is often where communication becomes most profound. I recall a teacher named Sophia who would ask her students questions and then wait without speaking. At first, students squirmed, whispered to each other, or fidgeted uncomfortably. But gradually they realized the pause was not emptiness, it was space for thought, for insight, for honesty. By learning to hold the quiet, she taught them to find clarity in their own minds before rushing to speak. In the same way, when you pause intentionally, you give your words weight and allow your listeners to find meaning in them. Pausing also disarms tension. In heated arguments or high-pressure meetings, people often rush, competing to be heard, over-explaining to prove themselves. I remember a manager named Rajiv who would nod silently after someone raised a point, letting the room fill with anticipation. People expected him to respond immediately, but the pause forced them to reflect, often softening their own stance before he even spoke. Silence, when wielded deliberately, can command attention without a word. It turns nervous energy into focused energy, and it signals that you are confined enough to let others' thoughts settle before imposing yours. There is a rhythm to speech that is amplified by strategic pauses. Think of a storyteller sitting by a campfire recounting a tale of suspense. The story is not simply in the words, it is in the pauses, the breath between sentences, the small silence that lets listeners' imagination complete the picture. I once knew a sales trainer, Elena, who taught new hires to pause after asking a question to a client. The room would seem frozen, uncomfortable at first, but within moments, clients filled the space with their thoughts, revealing more than they intended. The pause becomes a magnet for attention, a tool that turns listening into engagement and engagement into connection. Pausing without apologizing also reshapes your relationship with time in conversation. Most people speak as if time is an enemy to be rushed through. I knew a young speaker, Marcus, who felt he had to fill every second to prove he knew what he was saying. But when he began practicing deliberate silence, he discovered something unexpected. The room slowed with him. People started listening more closely, reflecting more deeply, and responding more thoughtfully. Pauses give your audience permission to breathe alongside you, to digest alongside you, to enter your rhythm, and in doing so, your presence becomes more commanding than any rapid-fire words ever could. Finally, the ability to pause without apology is a reflection of your internal steadiness. If you are constantly rushing to speak, it reveals inner impatience, self-doubt, and fear of judgment. I remember a lawyer named Simone who learned to pause before answering every question in court. At first, colleagues criticized her, thinking she hesitated, but over time, her pauses projected calm, authority, and clarity. Judges listened differently. Witnesses felt her presence, and her arguments gained a weight they had never held before. When you embrace the power of silence, it transforms your communication from a series of hurried words into a deliberate magnetic force that moves people, shapes perception, and anchors your authority in ways that speed and volume never could. The fifth key point is that you must speak from experience, not opinion. It's easy to pile up facts, statistics, or theories and present them as insight. But true resonance comes only when your words are drawn from the soil of your own life. I remember a man named Daniel who gave a presentation on leadership. He had read every book, memorized every quote, and rehearsed every line until perfect. Yet the room remained polite, detached. Then, a colleague shared a story of leading a failed project, the mistakes, the late nights, the raw uncertainty, and suddenly the entire room leaned in. People do not respond to theory, they respond to lived truth, to a voice that carries the weight of having been in the fire and walked through it. Experience speaks with a depth that opinion cannot reach. A young coach named Mara was trying to teach a defensive strategy to her basketball team. She could have explained it in technical language, reciting textbook definitions, but instead, she told a story of a game she had lost as a teenager, how one decision had cost her the win, and what she had learned from it. The players did not just understand the strategy, they felt it. They could imagine themselves in her shoes. When your words carry the texture of lived moments, the hesitation, the triumph, the fear, the joy, they become memorable because they are human, not abstract. There is a subtle authority in speaking from what you have faced. Consider a manager named Omar, who wanted to inspire his team to take calculated risks. He could have lectured about statistics, probability, or market trends, but instead, he shared a story from his first startup, when a single decision nearly cost him everything. He spoke about the doubt, the sleepless nights, the choices he made to survive and grow. His voice held weight because it came from first-hand understanding. Employees stopped hearing the words and started feeling them. Authority is not declared, it is proven through vulnerability wrapped in insight. Opinion is fleeting, but experience is anchored. I once met a young woman, Leila, who constantly debated ideas at work without grounding them in reality. She was passionate, articulate, and often right, but people grew tired of her arguments because they lacked grounding. Then she began sharing stories of projects she had led, of mistakes she had made, and the lessons that emerged. Her voice changed. Her ideas carried texture and credibility. When people sense that your words are rooted in actual encounters with life's complexities, they stop arguing, they start listening. Experience also builds relatability. There's a subtle magic in someone who has struggled, stumbled, and persisted. I recall a motivational speaker, Hassan, who once shared his journey of failing his first college exam, being laughed at by peers, and almost giving up entirely. He could have lectured on study habits, but instead, he transported the audience into his world of doubt and perseverance. People connected not because of the strategies he mentioned, but because they saw themselves in him. Speaking from experience is like giving someone a mirror rather than a map. They recognize the struggle as their own and are drawn in naturally. Speaking from experience forces you to examine your life with honesty. It requires that you strip away the facade, that you confront mistakes, fears, and vulnerabilities you might usually hide. I think of a small business owner named Anika, who had to close 2 stores before finding a model that worked. When she told her team only about her success, they nodded politely. When she shared the failures, the moments she almost quit, the uncertainty, her words ignited action. Experience contains contrast, texture, and the subtle rhythm of reality, qualities that opinion can never imitate. Finally, speaking from experience cultivates a quiet confidence that opinions never can. When you share what you have lived, your words carry an unshakable grounding, a rhythm of truth that commands attention without demanding it. I remember a mentor named David, who would answer questions with calm recounting of his own experiences rather than abstract ideas. People naturally gravitated toward him, sought his guidance, and trusted his judgment. The weight of a word drawn from life is heavier than 1,000 clever arguments because it is tangible, authentic, and real. It lands in the listener's mind not as something to debate, but as something to feel, to measure, and to remember. The 6th key point is that you must learn to listen, to respond, not to defend. Our sessions are a battlefield of quick replies, mental counters, and rehearsed rebuttals, but communication does not thrive in a war zone. I remember a man named Julian, who was in his first managerial role and constantly found himself frustrated in meetings. As soon as someone spoke, he would already be planning his argument, preparing to defend his position before fully hearing the other person. His team sensed the tension and began shutting down, offering fewer ideas, waiting for him to speak first. Listening to defend creates distance. Listening to understand builds connection, trust, and influence that cannot be manufactured. Listening to respond requires patience with silence and curiosity with words. I think of a young therapist named Nina, who would often hear clients pause, fumbling over how to explain their pain. Her instinct might have been to fill the silence with advice, but she learned to simply sit with the pause, asking thoughtful questions to guide understanding rather than jumping to provide solutions. Slowly, clients began to open deeper, revealing layers of struggle and insight that would have been hidden under her rushed responses. In conversation, your silence and attentiveness can be far more powerful than any clever sentence, because it signals that you value the other person's reality more than your own need to be heard. There is a subtle humility required in listening to understand. A young journalist, Samira, once confessed to me that early in her career she would dominate interviews, pushing her questions forward to control the story. She thought the more she led, the more authority she demonstrated. But the interviews felt stiff. Her subjects did. When she began to truly listen, pausing, reflecting, asking clarifying questions, her articles transformed. Sources shared details they had never considered mentioning. Her words carried authenticity because they were built on genuine understanding, not pre-packaged assumptions. Listening to respond demands letting go of ego, of needing to prove yourself in every exchange. Listening deeply also reshapes your perception of conflict. In a boardroom where opinions clash, most people listen only to find flaws they can attack. I watched a project manager, Elias, handle a tense disagreement over a deadline. Instead of rebutting immediately, he asked questions, repeated what he heard to confirm understanding, and waited. By simply listening first, he uncovered the hidden concerns behind the objections, resolved tension without argument, and allowed the team to collaboratively reach a better solution. Responding through understanding does not weaken your position. It strengthens it by revealing the truth behind the noise. The act of listening to understand is a practice in empathy, not sympathy. I remember a teacher named Mara who worked with students labeled difficult. At first, she tried to enforce rules with explanations and reasoning. Nothing changed. When she began to ask each student to describe their experience, to explain their choices and frustrations, she discovered patterns she had overlooked. By genuinely listening, she didn't just gain compliance. She gained respect, insight, and a classroom where voices mattered. Listening with curiosity transforms ordinary exchanges into meaningful connections that ripple far beyond the conversation itself. This approach also teaches restraint and self-awareness. A young entrepreneur, Omar, found that during negotiations, he often over-explained, offering justifications before fully hearing the other party. He realized that by slowing down and listening first, he could respond in ways that addressed the actual concerns rather than imagined ones. His words became precise and effective, not defensive or reactive. Listening before responding transforms your communication from reactive noise into intentional influence, because your words are guided by reality rather than assumption or fear. Finally, listening to understand creates trust that no argument ever can. People instinctively recognize when they are truly heard. I think of a mentor, Claudia, who handled client complaints not by immediately defending her team, but by repeating back what she understood and asking, "Am I seeing this correctly?" Clients felt acknowledged, not dismissed. They opened up, solutions were found, and long-term loyalty emerged. Listening to respond is not about waiting to speak. It is about giving the other person space to be fully seen. And in that act, you become someone worth listening to, someone whose words carry weight because they emerge from the fertile soil of real understanding. The seventh key point is that daily exposure beats talent every single time. Most people believe that being naturally articulate or clever is enough to communicate powerfully, but talent is only potential. It does nothing until it is exercised relentlessly. I think of a young actor named Leo who spent years believing his charm and voice would carry him to roles without ever stepping onto a stage in front of a live audience. He stumbled through auditions, froze during rehearsals, and watched peers with less natural talent rise because they simply practiced more, spoke more, and exposed themselves repeatedly to the discomfort of being seen and heard. Daily action, even small, imperfect, or uncomfortable, is what shapes unshakable communication. Exposure trains the mind to respond under pressure. I remember a business consultant, Maya, who dreaded client presentations so much that she avoided them at all costs. One day, she forced herself to speak to a single coworker every morning about a different topic for 5 minutes straight. At first, her voice shook, her sentences tangled, and her confidence crumbled. But after weeks, when she faced a room full of clients, the same nerves remained but no longer dictated her performance. Her brain had been conditioned to handle the stress, to keep producing coherent, engaging thoughts even when adrenaline surged. Exposure is the rehearsal your talent alone can never replicate. Daily exposure also turns fear into familiarity. Consider a young teacher named Arya who feared asking questions in faculty meetings. She began a ritual of speaking at least once every day, even in small ways, commenting in team chats, raising a point in discussions, sharing observations during lesson planning. At first, it felt awkward, almost humiliating. By the end of the month, the fear that had once paralyzed her became a companion she understood. The voice that trembled quietly strengthened, and when real opportunities came, she was ready. Repetition transforms panic into competence, and competence into presence. Exposure reveals gaps you can't see in theory. A musician, Sam, might practice scales endlessly, believing that talent alone will carry him through performance. But only when he plays in front of an audience, no matter how small, does he discover timing issues, hesitations, and nerves that practice alone could never show. Communication works the same way. Reading books, watching videos, or planning speeches in isolation builds knowledge, but it cannot replicate the immediacy of real interaction. Daily practice in real contexts exposes the cracks, allowing them to be repaired before they become failures in crucial moments. Consistency also builds a rhythm that reinforces your voice. I think of a young leader named Reena, who began recording herself speaking for 5 minutes each morning about any topic that came to mind. The first recordings were awkward, the second embarrassing, and the third painfully repetitive. Yet after 30 days, she noticed a rhythm in her speech, a cadence that felt natural, a confidence that didn't need rehearsing. Daily exposure trains not just skill, but the unconscious patterns that make communication effortless. It turns nervous energy into poise, hesitation into flow, and uncertainty into authority. Exposure also teaches resilience. A young entrepreneur, Omar, spent years pitching his business and hearing no more than yes. Each rejection could have crushed him, but the daily discipline of pitching, revising, and trying again transformed the sting of failure into data, insight, and muscle memory. Every conversation, every presentation, every interaction became a workout for his confidence. Talent would have offered promise, but exposure forged strength. The person who speaks consistently grows immunity to the fear that silences most people, learning to act despite discomfort, and gradually the voice that once trembled now resonates with certainty. Finally, daily exposure turns potential into presence. I remember a mentor named Clara who urged her students to speak publicly every single day, even if only for a minute. Some days they felt prepared, some days they felt terrified. The process was never glamorous, never easy, but it was transformative. Over time, they moved from being noticed occasionally to being felt consistently. Daily exposure is the heartbeat of communication mastery. It turns hesitation into instinct, nervousness into composure, and talent into an unshakable presence that no stage, audience, or challenge can unsettle. It is through showing up relentlessly, without waiting for perfect conditions, that your voice becomes not just heard, but impossible to ignore.